sourdoughs flipped out and ready to pop into our ovens that are nice and hot. So I've got our first one. And we're going to do our kind of crisscross score on these. And then we'll do just a little design. Sometimes it's nice to add a little scoring touches. We'll see how they all work out. These are the ones I meant to shape them up at night and then I fell asleep. So they got a little extra proofing time, but luckily it's so cold here that the proofing is not as long. You know, you can do a little extra because it's so cold, you know, in the winter. But we're going to pop this in my Dutch oven that I have preheated. There we go. We'll put our lid back on. And then we're going to get our next one scored out, which is probably, I want to say, my husband's and my kids, maybe their favorite loaf, which is the cinnamon swirl, which is just so delicious. It's a really simple loaf because all you do is during the lamination process, you sprinkle some cinnamon sugar and then a little extra cinnamon, and just so delicious. So we're going to kind of just dust some of this flour around first off. Sometimes it gets a little heavy in the basket. And then we'll give it a nice spread around. Okay. And then we're going to do a nice big expansion score. And then we'll just do our classic wheat leaf on here. And you can almost see when I cut into it, you can actually see the nice little cinnamon swirl layers on here. And I'll slide this guy into our preheated Dutch oven as well. We'll put our lid on and we're going to pop this into our oven as well. So both of these are going to go in at 500 degrees for 20 minutes. And then we'll take the lids off and bake them at 450 for 20 minutes. So I don't often use both of my ovens, but today I am using both of my ovens. So I've got my sourdoughs baking in here, and then I've got my beef bourguignon, and we're going to do our crisp in this oven, since that one will be at 350. Allows us to do 2 different temperatures and keeps everything cooked up really nice. Okay, slide these guys in here. Put my timer on for 20 minutes. And then we'll take our lid off and we'll bake it at 450 for the next 20 minutes. Before we get our potatoes going for our mashed potatoes, which we'll serve our beef bourguignon, which is our stewed beef over it. And I'll talk about how I made that in just a second. Let's get our cherry crisp base going. So I had a bunch of cherries in my fridge that I needed to use because they were getting past their prime. So I was like, oh, let's make a cherry crisp out of them because it's delicious. So we're going to add in here, I'm going to add in a little bit of butter. Let me actually grab a little stick of here. And then we're going to just cook them in here with a little bit of sugar. We'll add some vanilla and some cornstarch, some lemon juice, and kind of just make a nice thick base for it. And then we're going to make this lovely oaty topping, streusel base topping on it for it. But this is a good amount of cherries that I've taken the pit out because that's never a fun process. So I just did that off screen because it's a long process, but you definitely want to do it in there. And then cherries are pretty sweet on there, so we don't need a whole lot of sugar, but you definitely, of course, want to add some. I'm going to add about, not quite a full cup of sugar, but I'm going to add about 2/3 of a cup of sugar in here to create my nice little sweet kind of base for it. Again, you don't need a whole lot of sugar because cherries are pretty sweet fruit on themselves. They're not as tart as some, apples or whatnot that need a little bit more sugar in it. And then we're going to add some fresh lemon juice. Let me grab my knife real quick. Make sure. Look at this. Barely any seeds. I'm going to squeeze this over. I'm going to actually use both bits of my lemon here because actually, you know what? I think half might do it because this was a very, very juicy lemon. But you want about, I want to say, a tablespoon of fresh lemon juice. You can see we've got quite a bit out of there. And then we're going to add in about a teaspoon of vanilla, which is just going to give you such a really lovely, smooth base for this. I'm going to get my little spatula out here. We'll give this a nice stir and we'll let this kind of cook up. And then once those cherries have kind of sweated out some of their natural juices and everything, then we're going to add in some cornstarch to thicken it up. And then we'll make our little oaty topping to go on top. There we go. So giving it a good mix. And let's do our oat topping. That way it's nice and ready for it. Okay, we're going to start with a half a cup of melted butter, which is the same as 1 stick. We're going to put it in our bowl. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of brown sugar. This one, if you can remember a half, almost everything is a half a cup or a half a teaspoon, except when you get to the flour. So we're going to do a half a cup of brown sugar. We're going to make sure it's firmly packed down. And you want to use a light brown sugar. I found that dark brown is a bit too strong in the molassesy flavor for this, especially with a cherry. You can get away with a dark brown on, apple or pear, but with this one, you want to stick with a light brown. And then we're going to do about a half a teaspoon of cinnamon. Good. A couple little shakes. Half a teaspoon of salt. Half a teaspoon of baking powder. This is going to give our little crumb topping a nice little puff when it bakes up, so it's not super dense. And it's a really great, lovely texture to it that I absolutely love. We're going to mix these together, and then we're going to add in a half a cup of oats. We'll coat those oats up with this kind of brown sugary butter mixture, and then we're going to add in about a 3/4 of a cup of flour, and that's going to be our crumb topping. But I always like to make sure this part is all mixed in well first before we add in our flour, because then sometimes it doesn't coat up well. So just make sure you mix your oats in and everything before the flour. Otherwise, it just doesn't get the right coverage. We want a half a cup of oats. I am using old fashioned. You can also use quick oats. Just don't use steel cut oats. Steel cut oats are very hard and crunchy and just won't give you the right texture for this. So we're going to coat up our oats. There we go. I want to just make sure they get this nice cinnamon and brown sugar mixture on them. There we go. And now we'll add in our flour. But before we do that, let's give our cherries a nice little stir. As you can see, they're starting to sweat out some of their natural juices here. Which will be delicious. And now we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of flour. And you want to use all-purpose flour. We'll add that in, and then we're just going to mix it until we have a nice kind of crumb form. You don't want to kind of create a paste, but more just like kind of toss it together. And once towards the end, if it gets a little thing, you might want to just use your fingers to break it apart. Sometimes if you have like a pocket in your measuring, you might want to add a little bit more if it's too stuck together. So this one's a little bit stuck together, and sometimes like you might have a little less oats in it. Just add a couple, little sprinkles of flour. What we're essentially wanting is a nice kind of crumbly layer on top, nothing too thick on here. So I'm going to add just a sprinkle more until I've got, I want to say it holds together, but it's not one kind of super thick paste. There, just about right. Perfect. Okay, so we've got our oat mixture ready to go on top of our cherries once they're ready. We can let that sit right there. Slide this over. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse. And while we're waiting for these cherries to kind of cook up and reduce out, probably another minute or two before we add any cornstarch in, because we want them to, drip out enough of their juices that we can make kind of a nice little, gel with the cornstarch. We're going to peel up our potatoes and get them boiling for our mashed potatoes. So I'm going to grab several potatoes. I don't think we'll necessarily use all of them, but it's been really cold outside, and sometimes it causes my potatoes to freeze even though they're in the refrigerator outside. So
how much snow and ice did you guys get?
We really didn't get that much snow. We got about 3.5 to 4 inches of snow, but we got about an inch of ice, which is pretty devastating here. The kids, our school is now out for Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Lots of people are without power. My parents are out of power. Lots of trees are down. And we're very fortunate to have power. We have lost our internet, but hopefully that will be back up soon. But we've been fairly lucky with it, having the power still, since I think over 250,000 Tennesseans were without power. So a fair amount of people here. Because, just ice is just so devastating. Even though it might not seem like a lot, an inch of ice, it can cause just so much damage to the trees, which then cause them to, fall. We've lost a small tree, several branches, but again, we have been very, very fortunate that we have not had major impacts. Some of the videos that I'm seeing around, like my kids' friends' neighborhoods, and it looks awful. Like almost every tree in their neighborhood is down. So it's kind of really sad to see just how much destruction, an ice storm can have on, the nature and everything around. So we'll see. I'm hoping that the sun keeps coming out. It's supposed to warm up a little bit, which hopefully means we're going to get some more, melting down, and that will, put less stress on the trees so that no more continue to fall. And then that hopefully everybody can start to get power back, because there's still a lot of people that is going on day 2 without power here. So hopefully, just hoping for everybody on there, but we've been lucky on there. Although it is crazy. It's like a sheet of ice out there. My 10-year-old, she's like, can't we go out there? And I said, not right now, not with the trees covered in ice. I just don't want to take the risk of a branch falling on you or you guys slipping on the ice, because it just like, walking out, they're like, the trash service is like, oh, we're coming, we'll come. And they were like, sorry, we couldn't make it today. And I was like, I didn't think you were, but my husband, it took him like 20 minutes to get the trash can down the driveway. And we don't have that long of a driveway, but it was just like so slippery, and it was like stuck into the driveway. So we had to like chisel it out. But, I was like, what? Once it melts a little bit and it's a little bit safer out there, then you can go back out there. I said, you're not missing any sledding because it's a sheet of ice. Can't really sled on it. There's no powdery snow. It looks pretty, but it's not going to be fun to kind of work with. Let's take a pause real quick, because our cherries are looking like they are ready. Look at this, nice, lovely, kind of all the juices that have sweated out. So I'm going to turn my temperature down just a little bit. And we're going to add in some cornstarch. And this is going to be our thickener to kind of create this nice little gel. um, for our base of our crumble, because if you leave it too liquidy, it will bubble up over into your crumb on there. So if you don't want to use cornstarch, you can always like spoon out some of the extra liquid, but I find the cornstarch just works really, really well for this. So we added that butter in at the beginning, and that kind of takes away the chalkiness of cornstarch that can have it if you just use it without the butter. So it just needs a little bit of that kind of fattening to make the flavor a little bit more smooth. So we're going to start by adding in about a tablespoon. We'll mix it up, kind of stir it in, and then let it thicken up, and then we'll add a little bit more. And you'll essentially know when you have enough in there, and you just never know exactly how much you're going to need because you never know how much juice each cherry has in it. But once you've got a nice kind of thick gel forming, so we'll sprinkle it around. It's going to be about 2 to 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. And again, this is for a good amount of cherries. There we go. And don't just like put a big glob in at a time. Try to dust it over because cornstarch can sometimes thicken up into like a little ball, and then you get almost like a cornstarch dumpling. I'm going to turn up my heat just a little bit, see if adding a little bit of heat will thicken this up a little bit quicker. Because you don't want to add too much and then you realize that it's already there. You got to make sure your heat is on it because it won't thicken up under like a low temperature. There we go. I think we're getting there. There. Looking good. Add just a little bit more. Another again. Nice little light dusting over the top. There. And I think we should be just about there. Yep, I can feel the resistance forming when I stir it. It will feel like a nice kind of thicker sauce base for it. And when you move it, you see how I move it and I can slowly see the bottom of my pan. That's when you know it's getting thicker. There we go. Perfect. So you see how I drag it and now you can see the bottom of every pan you move. That's when you have a nice good thickness to it. So here we're going to add in there. We're going to add in our nice little crumb topping on the top. Here we go. I'm going to turn off my burner. Move this right over here. And we're going to just take, I'll slide this off because we don't need that anymore. We're just going to take our crumb topping right here and we're going to sprinkle it evenly over the top of our crisp here. And then we'll go back. First, you want to do a nice even coat, and then you can fill in any blank spots. So this one works really well in my little Dutch oven here. That's a smaller one. It's like a risotto pan. But it also works really well in a loaf pan. Especially if I'm taking this for like friends or family, I'll make this in one of those aluminum loaf pans, and this is about the perfect size for it. We'll break it up. Make sure you spread it around nice and evenly. And again, those juices from the fruit will bake up into the bottom area, but then the butter of the crumb will all melt together to create this just really wonderful crisp. Get the last of it on here. And then we're going to bake this at 350 for about 25 minutes until it's just got a nice golden kiss on the top of it. And I'm going to actually be putting it in my oven right here underneath the stove because my sourdough is cooking over there. So we'll pop this in here, which is kind of perfect timing because it looks like I have a few minutes left on it. So this will be ready when our sourdough is ready. And I have my beef bourguignon in here as well, which we'll take out in just a little bit. But let's get our potatoes going in here so that they can start boiling up for our mashed potatoes. kind of cube them up smaller. Try to keep them as evenly in size. These are russet potatoes, which are my favorite potatoes for mashed potatoes because they make a really light and fluffy mashed potatoes. Now, the only thing that you have to worry about with russet mashed potatoes is these ones, if you overboil them, they will disintegrate down to nothing. So you have to be careful and, don't forget about them or they'll turn away to mush and you'll just have a pot of starchy water. But it's not going to happen over, in a blink of an eye. You've got a good, 5-10 minutes before they really start to dissolve. But they do make the fluffiest mashed potatoes over, say, a Yukon or a red potato. They are ones that you definitely have to peel because the skins on the russet potatoes are not a tender skin. They're more chewy. So they do need to be peeled, but they make the best. There we go. And I'm doing them smaller. You could always do bigger, but smaller so they cook up faster. So our mashed potatoes will be done here. I'm going to pop them in.
How long do you need to boil the potatoes?
I always boil them until when I can spoon out my biggest potato and my fork can mash through it. It's going to depend on what size you cut them and whether you start your water hot or whether you start it from cold. I'm starting it from hot to make it go a little bit faster, but you can also start it from cold water and that just takes a little bit longer on there. So it really just depends on the things. The sure way is to do it is I'll fish through with a spoon. I find a big potato. If my fork goes through it easily, then it's ready for my mashed potatoes. I'm going to add in one more potato.
Do you have a favorite brand of potatoes?
I do not have a favorite brand of potatoes. I kind of get my potatoes, either whatever, the store brand is, whatever grocery store I'll get it in. And I use different types depending on what I'm cooking. You know what I mean? Mashed potatoes, I typically love to use, just the Idaho, like the russet potatoes. Those are my favorite. But if I'm making, a soup, I'm going to want to use a waxier potato like a Yukon Gold or a Baby Dutch or a red potato, new potato. So it just really depends what I'm cooking, but I don't have a favorite brand.
You get this question a lot. Where do you get the peeler?
This peeler I have had for a very long time ago. I actually got it in some little mom and pop store in Iowa. And so it is not one that is, it's just a no-name brand, but it is just like the OXO peeler, which I do have in my Amazon storefront. It is literally the exact same design, but this one is there. But I love this one because I have to tell you, not all peelers are made the same. And, some peelers people swear by, and this is the one I swear by. Some people can use the other ones, but not me. That's the one I like. And we're going to grab our sourdough off for a second, but I have a little starchy water here. I'm going to pour off the top. There we go. And then we're going to go take our sourdough out of the oven, and we're going to take off the lids, and we'll then bake them at 450 for 20 minutes. Okay. Got one.
You have a question? Is this like a beef burgundy?
Similar. Beef burgundy uses a burgundy wine in it, which is, so kind of similar on there. So beef bourguignon, you make a mirepoix, you do use some red wine in it, but it's a little bit differently, but a very rich kind of beefy dish as it is. Okay, so here is our traditional loaf. Lovely, beautiful pop on it. We'll add this in here. And then this is our cinnamon swirl. You can actually see a beautiful swirl right there popping through. And then we're going to turn our temperature down, which opening the door several times has already lowered the temperature down some. But we're going to bring it down to 450. And we're going to bake it for another 20 minutes. And then we'll be done with those. Okay, We've got our mashed potatoes going. I'm going to turn that up nice and high. We've got our crisp in the oven on here. And let's get our mushrooms sauteing up, and then we'll pull out our beef bourguignon, and we can talk about that on there. So part of the dish of beef bourguignon, so beef bourguignon, you're going to start with a chuck roast. And what I did with it is, I cubed it up into nice good sized chunks. And then I seasoned it with, garlic, salt, and black pepper, and some herbes de Provence. And then I seared it off in my Dutch oven. And then I removed it out. And then I made a mirepoix, which is kind of a chunky vegetable base. So I used onions, carrots, celery, garlic, sauteed them off in there. And then I added tomato paste, red wine, and beef stock. And that is what my beef roast, and then I put my meat chunks back in there, my chuck roast chunks, is been stewing in at 350 for the last 2.5 hours in the oven. So they're cooking there. The last part of the dish is you saute up mushrooms in a pan with some butter, and then you'll add them into the stew at the very end, because you want those mushrooms to get a nice kind of crisp up on the pan, and you don't want them to stew so long in there, because then you get a completely different texture versus a pan seared that is added at the last minute. So we're going to saute them up with a nice little butter base, and that will just give them a great soft flavor on them.
And what kind of mushrooms?
These are baby Bella, but you could use cremini or white button mushrooms. Pretty much any mushroom that you fancy. I go with the more economical. I love the baby Bella because I like their slightly earthier flavor to them, and they're, again, very reasonably priced. They're typically the same as white button, or just a fraction of the cost more. But again, you can use which one you like. You could also completely omit it if you don't like mushrooms. I love them, so of course I'm going to add them in there, but I know lots of people who will just omit this part. Here. And we'll get these all done. You can also use pre-sliced if you want. I like to slice them myself because my mushrooms will stay fresher longer, and I can slice them a little bit thinner, which means they get a nicer saute on each one, and I can bring out a little bit more of that flavor. So this is, roughly a pound of mushrooms, but when I slice them myself, it actually spreads out and it seems like I have a lot more mushroom.
And how many people are you cooking for?
We are cooking for 9 people tonight. With the ice storm, I've had my parents staying with us because they have no power at their house, and it is rather chilly out there. I figured they'd rather have a nice hot meal. So we've got our mushrooms here. We're going to melt off a little bit of butter to saute these in. Turn this around. Get that going right there. And since I have a good amount of butter, or a good amount of mushrooms here, I'm going to add in about, I'm going to say 2 tablespoons of butter to start with. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of fresh garlic out of my fridge so that we can mince up some garlic and add that as well, because I think that would be delicious too. Adds a little bit more flavor to the mushrooms. I don't need a whole lot because I did put fresh garlic in our mirepoix, the chunky vegetable base for this, but I will add a couple more. And we'll give these, and we'll let them kind of toast up in that butter, and then we'll add them in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull out our beef bourguignon, and I like to flip my chunks of meat over and let them kind of soak up on the other side after they've kind of cooked for a while. And grab some tongs. And we'll get this cooking around with our garlic. Our garlic, you're going to want to cook in the butter for about 30 seconds to a minute, and before adding in your mushrooms. Any longer than that, then you can kind of risk your garlic from, burning, because it's a very sensitive herb, but a very delicious one. But just don't leave it unattended. Now, when you're using a nonstick pan, it's a little bit, it doesn't transfer the heat as hot and as quickly as if you were to use an all metal pan, which means you can cook it a little bit longer. You have a little bit more of a, warning time. But if you're using like an all clad, they're metal based pan, the aluminum pans, those transfer heat a lot faster than with a nonstick coating, which means you just need to be more cognizant of those. So if you're always like wondering why your meat is or food is burning with a metal pan, that's because it's going to conduct heat faster than your nonstick pans. I'm going to turn down this. We're going to grab a paper towel and we're going to blot off some of this starchy water on the top of my potatoes. So this foam on the top of your potatoes here is just potato starch, and that's what's going to cause your water to boil over. You can always rinse your potatoes too before you put them in. That gets rid of some of it. But if I just use the little paper towel here, I can blot off that extra one. This will give me less sticky mashed potatoes and more fluffy mashed potatoes, because the starch is what's going to make your mashed potatoes more sticky. We'll just slide this off. Fold that up. And then I think I've got a little bit more I can slide off around the sides. And get a little bit of that potato starch off. There we go. Now, looks like my garlic, as you can see, has got a nice little golden brown toastiness to it, which is looking wonderful. So we're going to add in our mushrooms now. And we've got quite a bit of mushrooms here, but they will be delicious. And I'll see if mushrooms are like little sponges and they will suck up a lot of this butter. And if they need more, I'll add some, but I don't want to add too much in case they don't need it. We're going to coat them around.
What kind of pots and pans do you use?
So I have, I've kind of got, for my stovetop mainly, I've got two types. For my nonstick, I use HexClad. I kind of made the switch to HexClad about 2 years ago, and I really love them because I have yet to damage them. They truly are like scratch resistant, and they clean up really well, and they conduct their heat really well. So I've been really happy with my HexClad pans, even with the price point being a little bit more expensive. I do like them. And then my other pans that I have, which are my all-clad, I've had these going on a little over 16 years. I've got them all as wedding presents, and I have loved them. They have been really great. They've looked just like they were, gifted to me many years ago, and I use them all the time.
Can you go over the deep prep one more time?
Yes. I'll actually take it out of my the oven right now because we're going to give a flip and I'll talk through it. So let me grab my little oven mitts. So I started off with about a 3-pound chuck roast on here. Let me grab this real quick. And I cubed it up into nice big sized chunks that I then seasoned with garlic salt, black pepper, and I seared off on all sides, a nice high sear. And then I removed the meat from the pan, and then I added a diced up onion. I like to flip each piece over in our thing. And then I sauteed that up, added in a couple cloves of minced garlic, 4 carrots that I minced up or diced up, about 3 stalks of celery. We sauteed all of those together. And then I added in tomato paste, about a half a cup of red wine, and about 2 cups of beef stock, a bay leaf, and we've been letting this simmer at 350 in the oven for about 2.5 hours here going on. And we should have this lovely, like I can break my meat apart with my tongs here. You see how soft, tender, and wonderful this is? So just delicious. We're gonna add our sauteed mushrooms to this, but I always like to flip them over and the meat in it after they've roasted for a long time, because any of those tips that are out of the thing can soak up those flavors.
Do you sear the beef with a flour coating?
I do not sear it with a flour coating. You can definitely coat it up if you want to, but I prefer to leave it without the flour coating on it. That's just gives you the options if you want to do it, like a gluten-free version of it or not. But I do it without the flour coating, just sear it up on its own, because the tomato paste that you add in to it is going to naturally thicken up your base of your beef bourguignon.
Do you know if the hex-clad pans can go in the oven?
I have put my hex-clad pans in the oven. I think they can go up to a certain, temperature-wise. A lot of times when I'm searing off steaks, and I'll put them in the oven for it. I've never done it for an extended period of time, but they've been in there for 10 minutes at, 400 degrees. So I believe they can, because I think they're just like a regular metal pan on that sense. Under certain things, a lot of bakeware can't go in certain extreme temperatures on there, based on it, like Le Creuset Dutch ovens can, but there's a difference between each type of Le Creuset. So if you have the black top Le Creuset right here, this black top can really only go in the oven to 350. If you have the metal top ones, the metal tops can handle up to 500 degrees, 600 degrees. And so it's one of those things where if you didn't know that, you would think, oh, all Le Creuset Dutch ovens, the Dutch oven can, but the handle can't. But you can always buy replacement handles, which is what I've done with mine that I've cracked over time.
Marianne says they can go up to 900 degrees.
Okay, perfect, 900. So I figured as much, because most aluminum metal pans can on there. Okay, we've got this in here, nice little things. We're gonna add a little bit of salt in here to kind of bring out a little bit of that moisture. And then we're gonna check on our mashed potatoes, see how they are cooking up, see if they're ready to whip up. Just gonna sprinkle a little bit of garlic salt over the top. I'm not gonna mix it in yet. I'm just gonna let them kind of steam out their liquid for it. And give it a little toss here. Let me grab a fork here. For our mashed potatoes, again, you're gonna wanna look for a big potato, and you're gonna check for its readiness by I'm gonna pushing, is if your fork can go through it. So I'm picking my biggest one right here. If my fork goes through it easily, just like that, these are ready to mash up.
And how many aprons do you have?
I probably have like 10 or 15. I have a lot of aprons because they get messy after a while, and they go through, and we're a large family and we have a lot of laundry. So, they take a while to get through the cycle of the laundry on it. But what I love is Hedley and Bennett has these mystery boxes where you can get essentially like 3 aprons for the cost of one. And I have done that a couple of times. And I have like scored, this was one of the ones that I got in a mystery box. I've scored some really nice aprons out of there. I've also gotten some like Star Wars ones and whatnot, but I've gotten really like plain basic ones, which are really nice because their aprons are really nice, just expensive. And I really like them. So I always say, if you're not like set on having like a absolute certain look, but you just want something that holds up well, check out the mystery boxes. They are a good deal. Okay, we're gonna strain this. There we go. Shake out any extra. Pop it back in here. And then turn that off. I'm gonna put my stick of butter in here, and we're gonna let it melt up for our mashed potatoes, since we have a good amount of potatoes in here. And I typically about a tablespoon of butter per potato, and we had about 8 potatoes in here. I'm not going to whip up my potatoes until that stick of butter is melted. That's just going to give me a fluffier mashed potato. But that butter is room temperature, not cold. Let me grab out my cream. Must have cream. I'm going to put this in here as well so that it can warm up. And then we'll whip these. So just a nice drizzle. I'll whip them and see if I need to add any more. Give our mushrooms a quick toss. Beautiful. Looking fantastic. I'm waiting for them to get this nice little crispy edge on them. So I have them again at a pretty high heat. I'm going to spread them out. We're cooking off all of the moisture on them so that we can get this, again, this beautiful, nice little crispy sear on them. And you can see the steam escaping from them. That's going to allow all of this great flavor to come out. And then we're going to put them into our beef bourguignon. So slightly, instead of cooking them in there from the beginning, which gives you a softer, mushier mushroom, this will give you a mushroom with a great texture, strong flavor that we add in at the very, very last moment. Sprinkled some salt over this. I'm going to add some more. When I make my mashed potatoes, I don't salt them in the boiling process because I find it's better just to salt when you're ready to taste. That way, you're just not wasting the salt because you strain out the water, and potatoes are like sponges. And so this way you're getting an accurate amount of what you're putting in and using. We're going to whip these up, but let me first give them a nice stir, see how that butter is. It looks like it's just about melted. Break it apart, give it a good stir. Now, since the all-clad pan is an all-metal pan, I'm going to whip my mashed potatoes straight into the pan. Do not do this if you have a non-stick pan. You will ruin your pan. But with an all-metal pan, you can do this right up. We're going to whip it around, and then I'll see how much more cream I need to add to it because I want a nice fluffy mashed potato.
What did you make for lunch today?
For lunch, we made a lovely kind of a fresh chicken pasta. So I had these snowflake pastas, which was super cute and perfect. They were little snowflake shaped. And then I cooked up, like we did a seared chicken breast with a tomato and spinach kind of lighter pasta sauce. And then we kind of spooned that over. It was so delicious. And then we made pumpkin scones. So delicious. On there, everyone was very, very happy. Evie was very, very happy with her plain buttered noodles on the side, and they all thought the snowflakes were so cute. So that was one of my finds right before the snowstorm was predicted, and I found them at the store, and I was like, oh, these are perfect. Okay, mushrooms are just about done here. I'm going to add a little bit more cream because, again, I want a nice fluffy and soft one. So we're going to add a little bit more. And I will say you can never predict exactly how much cream you're going to use because you just don't know how starchy a potato is going to be. Some are more starchy than others. And so you're just going to go on how it looks and how fluffy it comes together. There we go. We're almost there. Mixing it around. I think I'll add just a little bit more, but I'm going to give a taste. We'll add a splash more. And then I'm going to add a little bit more salt. And then our mashed potatoes should be nice and ready. And this is what we're going to spoon our beef bourguignon over, and it will be just so delicious. There we go. I'm going to really whip it around. Now, if you ever have the problem of having lumpy mashed potatoes, that is because you didn't cook your potatoes all the way through. So when I went and I reached for and I grabbed the biggest potato out of there and I made sure my fork could go through it, if your fork can go through the biggest potato, that means all of your potatoes should be cooked through and tender, and that means it shouldn't be lumpy. Lumpy potatoes means that you just didn't cook your potatoes all the way through. Okay, we've got our little beef base. We're going to add in our sauteed mushrooms now. Look at these, nice. You see these wonderful kind of crispy sears on them as I flip them over. Just beautiful. We're going to add them in. And then it'll be time for us to grab our sourdough out of the oven. Pretty much perfect timing here, guys. Good amount of mushrooms. And then I'm just going to give them a nice toss and coat them under for this. Look at that. So delicious. And just again, look how tender. I can just break it apart with my tongs. That's how tender this beef is. And that's what you get from, you sear it off. Searing it allows it to keep its form instead of turning into shredded beef. If you don't get the meat where it just completely falls apart, but searing it off before you put it in there allows it to keep its form when it cooks. And then the other nice thing is it soaks up and it cooks. It's been cooking for about 3 hours in there, and it really brings in all those flavors, but it's so tender as well. Okay, let's get our sourdough bread out of the oven. And we've got, I'm going to slide these over here and then we'll bring them over. This is our traditional loaf. And this is our cinnamon swirl loaf. You can see that nice dark cinnamon on it. We'll bring this right over here. I'm going to move my mashed potatoes because it's on my little pan here. There we go. Slide that up. Pop that in here.
At what temp and how long for the beef?
So I cooked it at 350 for about 3 hours on there. Now, if you want to stretch out the time, you can always go longer and go a little bit lower and slower for it. With the lid on, that's going to keep in the moisture and protect it from, drying out or anything like that. Here is our traditional sourdough loaf. Nice, beautiful golden crust on here. Wonderful. I'm going to move that out of there. That again is our basic one. Simple ingredients, simple one. And then our next one right here, which is our favorite, is our cinnamon swirl loaf. And you can see just how much that cinnamon swirl has popped out there. It's just beautiful on there. We've got that nice cinnamon swirl throughout in there. And it's got a little bit of sweetness from it, from a little bit of sugar, and that cinnamon adds sweetness. But again, just a wonderful and delicious loaf. So good, so good. Okay, guys. Oh, and I said our crisp was just going to be done right when our sourdough is done. I almost forgot all about it. We slide this over here, and we can get our cherry crisp out of the oven. Oh, it is looking fantastic. Here is our gorgeous cherry crisp made with fresh cherries and with this wonderful Odie topping. You can see it bubbling up. It's alive, but so delicious. We used kind of, we have our fresh cherries in there. We made a nice sweetness with a little bit of sugar, lemon juice, and vanilla. And then, of course, our basic crumb topping with a little splash of cinnamon, oats, brown sugar, and flour. Okay, guys, let's serve up our dinner. Okay. And I'm going to slide these guys over here. We're not going to cut into them yet because, again, sourdough needs about 5 to 10 minutes to sit before you cut through it. Otherwise, it's gummy because it has to steam off before you cut in there. That's just one of those rules with sourdough. And then let me grab, we've got our chunks. I'm going to grab this for our beef bourguignon. Okay. Slide this guy over here. Okay, so for dinner tonight, we have our creamy mashed potatoes, which will make a lovely bed in the middle of our plate. And this is made with russet potatoes, cream, butter, and salt. And we are going to place our chunks of chuck roast on here that we stewed in our lovely beef bourguignon sauce. We sauteed up mushrooms, and we have this beautiful mirepoix using carrots, onions, celery on there, and then we're gonna drizzle this over on there for just this amazing and delicious dinner. And then we're going to serve up our beef bourguignon with a slice of traditional sourdough bread for just this wonderful hanging lovely bread to dip into both the sauce in there. And then we have our cinnamon swirl sourdough bread. And then for dessert, we have our cherry crisp made with fresh cherries with a lovely oaty topping on it for a nice little sweet treat at the end. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made, our beef bourguignon, mashed potatoes, and cherry crisp, and you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Hexclad pans, my Allclad, my Dutch ovens, my knives, cutting boards, all the different things that I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.